Awesome. How you doing, Dennis?
Good, man. It's been a long time. How have you been?
Yeah, it's good. Definitely a lot the past couple of years. I'm in New York now, just kind of doing a mix of things right now. But yeah, how's where are you based right now?
I'm in SF right now. So I was actually in New York for the last 3 months, and then I came back to SF about 2 weeks ago.
Okay,
But
nice.
I've been in the Bay Area for the last 8 years, and so New York was kind of just a
Hmm.
fun detour post pandemic. Well, I mean, it looks like we're back into it somewhat. So who knows? But
Yeah,
back in the
yeah,
Bay now, and gonna look for a lease soon. Yeah, settling down.
nice. And yeah, I guess just a quick question. Definitely want to kind of give like an introduction to you. But are you guys remote, or have you been doing a lot of like remote work?
Yeah, so our team is fully remote, and
Okay.
we actually started right before the pandemic, and my co-founder and myself, Kevin, we actually were living together basically for the first 2 years, and the first the decision was kind of made for us, right? Because the first employee that we
Yeah,
hired was in June of 2020, and there was no way that we were going to hire someone in person at that point in time, right? So
yeah.
since then, we've just started scaling our team remotely. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Dennis, great to have you on here. Definitely a lot to catch up on. It's been a while since Stanford, but yeah, I guess just kind of get started. Um, Love for you to give an introduction of what you're working on currently, and then just kind of like an overview of how you became an entrepreneur, like that journey, and
Yeah.
how it led to what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. I'm one of the co-founders of this company called Mem.ai. And what we're essentially building is the world's first self-organizing workspace. And what we mean by that is, there's all of this information that we actually have that we
Hmm.
capture ourselves, or latent information, latent knowledge, I like to call it, that is just, waiting to be used, right? And we have such a large digital footprint, both ourselves, our teams, nowadays, but it seems like, all of that is just trapped in silos and unable to actually be utilized. So what we do is we essentially help you automatically organize all of this information. You just have to
Hmm.
focus on, hey, I'm capturing and I'm sharing this information with my team, with fellow collaborators. But how do we, essentially remove the organization step from you? And most, I think, unfortunately, most knowledge workers nowadays are spending so much time essentially being librarians, right? And when
Yeah,
they should
yeah.
really be focused on what they do best, which is be creative. So yeah, that's what we do. We were founded back in 2019, and we're like I said earlier, fully remote company, and yeah, it's been a crazy ride. So in terms of like how we got into it in the first place, I think first of all, my co-founder and I we met about 8 years ago in our freshman dorm at Stanford, became
That's
best
sick.
friends, and yeah, he pulled me into computer science. I actually wasn't planning on doing that at all initially, and then kind of fell in love with just being able to build things. The two of us, we went through Lightspeed Summer Fellowship Program, which used to be a thing back in 2015.
Hmm.
That was our first stab at like building something. I wouldn't say it was a real company because it definitely wasn't, but it was building something, and then we built countless things together just for fun.
Yeah,
Things for our friends, for our fraternity. Random things, and just tinkering all the time. And then after college, we kind of went our separate ways. I went to Google for 2 years. I went to Yelp for 2 years, but we always would jump on this call that we would call Dream Team. And every other Wednesday, we would just go and chat about, hey, when are we doing it? Right? Because it
yeah.
was always a matter of when. And so after about 2 years, and this was, we graduated 2017, so in
Hmm.
2019, that was when we gained conviction on this idea now and decided to go and take the plunge.
Nice. No, really, really good overview and a lot you touched upon that's like really interesting. Yeah, no, I think one thing you highlighted there. I mean, honestly, one thing that it's tricky because it's not for everybody, and I've there's not the right answer, but the fact that you guys kept building and I mean, first off, you have a friend, you guys are collaborating, teaming ideas and just tinkering together, and like it's all about experience and building over time. And the fact that you guys kept that dream team meeting going, and had the conviction or just like the dedication of one day we're going to try something, when unfortunately, like, it's fine. Like it makes, you don't want to rush things, but I feel like a lot of people, which like, is sad to me, a lot of people lose that hope and like don't venture out and take that risk. And, I've talked to a lot of people, we both went to Stanford together, and, I feel like it goes on like unsaid a little bit that like your 20s should be more experimental than people make them out to be. And because, when you're older, you can't be taking risks as much, or like, can't try things with as much energy or creativity or whatever. So the fact that you guys have a track record doing that, I didn't know that fully. So that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And you built that relationship with your good friend on like, we're going to keep building and getting better at it, and that we're going to do it. That's huge. So definitely commend you for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, it's funny because there's a lot of things, obviously that are hard about building a company, but I think one of the things that I've learned just from, seeing a lot of friends and just kind of people go through it is actually, for a lot of people, the hardest thing is just getting started. And it's committing to the unknown, and all of that. So, I mean, luckily I think for me, that's always been something that's been very exciting and hasn't, really been an issue there, but my problem is finishing things, not starting things. I can kind of relate to that. I think I've always enjoyed I've always just enjoyed building things and just like doing something different. That over time, actually, I think I've gotten better at being more conservative with the ideas to work on, like trying them out first, because like it's easy to drop a hat. Yeah, screw this. I want to just try that. That was actually one of the main lessons we learned from our summer at Lightspeed, which was we kind of jumped into that idea, and we quite frankly, we were doing it for the sake of doing it, and I think it was still valuable because we ended up learning a lot of lessons on product. But the most important lesson I think we learned, which is why it took us 2 years to ultimately decide, hey, this is what we're going to do, is we really have to be extremely passionate about the idea, and it has to be an evergreen mission. Right. So, that's why it feels like what we're working on, today feels so right, because there's no endpoint. There's no like, oh, once we do this, then it's done. It's people are always going to have this problem, right? People are always going to want better ways to organize, move, and find, discover information, and collaborate. Right. So,
no, 100%. Yeah. And I would add to that. I don't think people say do something you're passionate about. Like it's kind of tricky because we're the founders of Slack, passionate about, workplace messaging, not necessarily. And like, there's the aspect of fun to build something interesting that has room to grow. But I think the key there is work on something that you're passionate about, because you want to be okay putting time into it, because things do not happen overnight. And to your point, you want to work on something that, you're going to be interested in doing for a couple of years, because it's very easy to work on something and be like lose interest. Like, it's cool, but I'm not going to put more hours in, because, inevitably you're going to hit multiple roadblocks. And it's like, that's the journey of starting a company.
Yeah, definitely.
And Dennis, what was the startup that you guys did for that summer?
Yeah. So it was called Rhythm IQ. But it was, ambiguous in terms of how, you could actually pronounce it, because you could say it was rhythmic and all of that. So, that was one of the lessons, which is ambiguity is always bad. And what we basically did was it was an anonymous posting and polling platform for enterprise, right? So this is around the time where we were seeing on campus there was Yik Yak. I don't know if you remember What's Goodly and all of that, but very interesting kind of like consumer dynamics, and obviously there a lot of consumer trends always end up making it to the enterprise. And so what we decided to do is, hey, could we actually unlock some interesting things by making it so that we can actually surface the best ideas, right? Because a lot of times within an organization you have this hierarchy, and when it's very clear who who it is that's saying something, that seems to, matter a lot more than, what they're saying, what the idea is, et cetera. Right. So the idea was basically if we could actually remove identity, and of course, it was, there are a whole host of issues that's associated with that, right? But if we could eliminate that, could we actually, create a more meritocratic organization? Very, very interesting.
Cool. Yeah, and I know a couple of my friends actually were co-founders of What's Goodly, very familiar with like consumer messaging and all that. I mean, kind of like Blind came out around that. So I know they're still, but to be honest, I don't really know how well they're doing. I think they raised, but I feel like when you're in the consumer, like I've done consumer social so many times, I'm kind of like over it. I love, but I will say, like when you're in college, like what are you?
It's the only thing right?
It's the only thing Like it's I always people say this all the time, like you can't build something they don't have really experience in, or you have to be inspired by something that's in front of you.
Yeah,
and so that's why all the consumer apps happen from like college kids or high school kids, and also it'd be kind of weird to be a 40-year-old doing a consumer social app. But it's like natural. Like I did that, and I mean it's good to like. That's the time to try it out. But yeah, consumer social is tough, really tough. I mean, especially when there's no revenue. But the cool thing around that is we're starting to see like more consumer social or consumer products that are monetizing earlier, which I think is like way more interesting to like make money first and then and then later down the road, go for engagement. And I think like Facebook and all like the, big giants that kind of made it really tough where they're stealing your attention. So like basically used to be like engagement first and then monetization. Engagement's so hard because of like Facebook and, Snapchat and TikTok. So it's actually better now to be forced to do like monetization first and then figure out engagement later. But yeah, so I guess like what other lessons did you guys learn from building this product?
Yeah, honestly, I think, going back to your point, right? One of the key ones was that we didn't really understand the problem. I think between the two of us, we had I think two internships under our belt, right? So it was 6 months total of professional experience, and we didn't really deeply understand kind of the potential issues. I mean, sometimes that's a good thing, right? Sometimes you need founders who come in with fresh eyes. Who The reality is, if everyone knew what they were getting themselves into, right, nothing new would be done in this world, right? So
it's true.
I think some level of naivete is definitely helpful, but I think we just didn't really fully understand the problem. And there are some founders who I think are excellent at that. I think in a lot of B2B settings, you really have to, be okay with not being the user and just not having that intuitive understanding. But I think for someone like me, I think that's it's really important for me to actually be able to have the problem myself to experience that, right? So I think that was the those are the really main two learnings. And then of course we obviously learned a lot of tactical things around growth, how to actually seed a community, because it was a lot of there was a chicken and egg problem of, hey, how do we actually get the first, how do we solve the empty room problem, get the first few pieces of content out, et cetera. But
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I definitely want to talk about Mem a lot. I mean, I think, from my understanding, I actually was like, kind of followed along your guys' journey, and obviously been checking out the product. And like as a personal, I feel like you guys are kind of bridging enterprise, like kind of like this new wave of. There's a lot of things to talk about: AI productivity, AI, which I think maybe we can start there. Like, I feel like AI has taken a back seat. I feel like 10 years ago, and you can elaborate more on this. Like 10 years ago, AI was everything. Everyone's talking about it. It was the buzzword. Yeah. And then like there's a couple startups that maybe incorporated, but more in the background. Yeah. And it wasn't really, and then all those funding rounds kind of went nowhere. I didn't really follow what happened. Yeah. And then now the buzzwords are crypto, creator economy, fintech, international, all those things. And people are forgetting that like AI is like such a powerful like tool, and you can incorporate it into like basic things. And like, you know, from content creation tools to, I mean, there's so many things you can plug it into, but that's obviously be done in the right way. But yeah, I guess like, what are your thoughts on like AI as a trend and like where it's at right now?
Yeah, I think there's this interesting trend that usually happens in technology where there's this hype cycle for something that happens.
Yeah.
Inevitably, the hype cycle always dies down, and then when that hype cycle dies down, like, you know, I think a great example is crypto in 2017, right? Between 2013 and 2017, crypto was just, you know, on a huge ride, and then in 2017, the huge crash, and most of the interesting things that actually have been built, you know, and have surfaced in the last, you know, few years were actually started and worked on during that time, right? So I think I think, you know, a lot of AI is actually following that same trajectory, right? Which is there was so much promise in the beginning, and then people realized that we were in this uncanny valley where you know, things would work 95% of the time, but in order for something to really be useful, right? And I think this is like the fundamental challenge with a lot of AI applications, right? They work in like demo settings, but a lot of the time they don't actually work, you know, 100% of the time. And sometimes, you know, rules-based things work better. So people, you know, couldn't really figure out a way to actually turn it into a useful application. And then, you know, a lot of the hype died down. But that's, I think, actually where the most exciting time to build is, right? And I think there's a lot of things that I think is pretty well known now in the community, but there have just been over the last, you know, I would say even few months, just some incredible advancements in the fundamental technology and being able to use it, right? So, like, I don't know how closely you've been following OpenAI, but you know, they released their GPT-3 model last year that I think a lot of people started talking about. But, you know, silently, they've also just been releasing a lot of really interesting things. You know, it feels like on a weekly or a monthly basis, and they're actually one of our main vendors for what we're doing right now.
Interesting.
So it's I think the next few years is really all going to be about AI. And I think, you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think crypto is interesting, especially technologically. I think, you know, they have some issues with how the community works and all of that, right? But I just think the most exciting things that are actually pushing the world forward, and this is what gets me excited, right? Which is, how do we actually, like, I see technology as an enabler for human potential. And to me, I'm definitely a techno optimist. You know, I believe that technology is, you know, honestly, the greatest force for good in the world. If you look throughout the course of human history, like that is, you know, that is, it is probably the thing that has actually improved the standard of living the most. And you know, in my opinion, it's not even a debate. I think the next 2 years, we're really going to see a lot of the foundational research come into fruition. And, you know, I say that partially because I know that it's one of the things we're doing, right? So,
yeah, no, that's super cool. And like, I follow a little bit GPT-3. Obviously, like, I feel like if you're in the startup community, you hear about it. And I've seen a lot of cool applications of it that are like, you know, gimmicky, but like just demonstrate how, you know, like from tweet generators to you know, creating like kind of like holy grail. And I worked in advertising and, you know, content and marketing a lot, like being able just to create content with words. I think it's insane. And all that, but yeah, I mean, so like, just to kind of elaborate really quickly on OpenAI, I know a decent amount about them. I know they're open source, obviously, but like, how does it operate? I mean, like clearly, like, they're open source. I mean, they're R&D, but like, why? Like, what's like their background? Really quick overview, and like, why do they? I understand open source communities, but like, you know, there is value in not sharing things.
Yeah,
like,
so they're not actually open source. They actually started off as a nonprofit, and, you know, they were originally the original plan, I think, was, you know, I mean, and this, I think, is still their mission, is to basically make the power of AI accessible to builders, right? It's in some ways you can almost think of them as like what AWS did for SaaS companies that they're trying to do for AI companies. So yeah, I think in terms of like how they work, they're basically just an API company, like Stripe, where they have trained a mega model, on billions of parameters and billions of basically the entire web, right? So anything you've read on the web, and then a lot of other data sources, and I think that's the key innovation, right? So there's over the last few years, I think there's this new model that has come out called BERT models, so BERT transformers, right? And that is basically the new state of the art in AI. And what they did is they took that and they just threw way more data into it. And obviously, there's a huge upfront processing cost to that, right? And now what they do is they essentially provide that as an API and a bunch of different services. So yeah.
How do they move from nonprofit? Because what their core is like just scraping the web and getting a ton of training data. Like, is that, and like, obviously they're running models on that, but how do they go from nonprofit to, I assume they're for profit, to run that?
Yeah. So I actually don't know the exact details around why they went from nonprofit to for profit. I think they just think, it's probably better suited for that model, right? And yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, but the key thing that makes their model so much better is there's a lot of other companies who are, trying to provide the service. There's a lot of open source models as well now too, right?
Yeah.
The key difference is just basically what they actually train it on. And then of course, I'm sure there's some magic sauce behind that as well. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, I remember like literally 10 years ago, everyone's like AI will be the new electricity and all that. And heard that everywhere, and then now like I don't hear about AI really anymore. But to your point though, and actually I was talking to my brother about this, who works in crypto, and I have a lot of friends who work in crypto, like about like this potential crypto winter we're going into again. It's true observation that like you kind of get. He was saying like you get the true value companies during these times. You don't get the fluff and all the hype. Like the hype is good to bring smart people to it. And then once that hype dies down, the people who are actually good at it and enjoy it and like sustaining at it, I guess stick through. And then that's when you have like the true change.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think if you're really in the weeds and if you're really building, for the right reasons, I think most people don't even notice, right? It's like whatever.
Yeah.
That meme. It's like, oh, first time, right?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, and then, about what you're saying with, how GPT-3, content creation, all of that. I think what's interesting is those things, and we started looking at it back then as well. Those are what I would consider to be kind of the interesting demos, but they're not, I think people saw that it was very tweet worthy. And so that they went viral and all of that. But I think a lot of that actually wasn't that applicable. And if you really try to, there's like niche applications where that actually works. But I think there's a lot of sleeper things that they've launched recently. So for example, Embeddings, right, which essentially allows you to take any series of words and convert it into a vector, which just represents the semantic meaning of of what that sentence or paragraph means, and then being able to actually do crazy things such as search from that, compare that to other sentences and tell you, hey, these two sentences are actually very similar and all of that.
Interesting.
That's, I think, so that's the stuff that we're using and leaning into.
And I know, no, I agree. I use some of those tweets. They're kind of like after you run it like 4 or 5 times, you could essentially just make it random, and it's like not
right.
And also,
it's great for it's great. I think it's great for generating marketing copy. I've definitely used that before. In the past, right?
Copy.ai, I think. I know they're like doing decent and like once again going to where the money is right away.
Yeah,
that like you don't have to spend years to prove it out in the right use case. But even like I've tried to use personally for a couple of things I've been working on, AI generators or optimizers for writing articles and blog posts. I've actually experimented with a good amount. There's so many of them, and those businesses actually do pretty well. I will, as a side note, like these companies that like make one tool that you SaaS, but like for a niche group, but like it's very valuable. They actually can be $1 million companies, and people they're not as sexy as the $1 billion ones. But anyway, but I've used a couple of them, like it's like I forgot the names of them right now, like Jarvis, I think, .ai, and they help you create like articles from sentences and words and all that, and then it's SEO optimized, but it ends up not being really that good though. It's still like an uncanny valley. It's still you can tell it wasn't done by like a human, right?
And also those are the obvious ideas, right? So I mean, like whenever you have a new fundamental technology, I think people do try all the obvious ideas first, and then realize the obvious ideas. There's a reason they don't usually work, right? But I think there's a lot of hidden potential.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. So I want to talk about Mem. So kind of high level from my perspective. You guys are trying to create like almost like a personal assistant in a way. Like as a consumer, and also as like a worker. There's so much content nowadays. Everything is designed to hijack your attention. Notifications are insane. I actually I know there's been note-taking apps in the past. I never really leaned into them. I didn't think that they were that great. I mean, even now I sometimes find myself texting myself reminders or little like things, and I can download a note-taking app, but it's like same as a notes section on my phone. It's literally the same thing. There's no better level processing or organization. It's becoming insane. And so I think every single platform is now adding notifications. There's so much information we're getting. It is overwhelming. And last thing I'll say on this before, and I want you to, speak to this, this is your guys' mission. Last thing I'll say is like I've thought about this before, that why don't we have, I wear contact lenses, people have hearing aids, trying to think better braces, I guess, for your teeth and eating, gloves for your hands, like all the different senses. And we don't really think of cognition as a sense, but in a way it is the ultimate sense, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking. I've always thought that especially with psychology, mental health, as well as productivity and organization, our brains aren't designed to be taking in this much information that we get today. And why do we augment our other senses, but we're not augmenting our thinking? I feel like one day we'll have a chip in our head that organizes our thoughts. Be productive now, or that's a negative thought, for PTSD or for, anxiety. Organizing that, that's our ultimate sense, and we still are kind of in caveman land of just crazy thoughts all over the place, not organized. And I feel like that's the holy grail, because then that kind of brings everything back together. So just want I mean, first of all, I could not agree more about note-taking apps, right? And this is why it's always an interesting thing when people compare us to note-taking apps, because I get it. It's a simple thing to kind of look at. And quite frankly, it's a simple concept for people to understand, right? So a lot of times, that's I grimace a little bit whenever people call us a note-taking app, but the reality is a lot of people are trying note-taking apps, and it's a simple on-ramp, right? But I think ultimately, on your point in terms of cognition, first of all, that's just, I think, one of the most important things we can do, for at least personally, my personal mission to kind of accelerate, progress, right, in humanity. I think if you look at how we actually organize information today in our brains, right, and the way that our memory works is just totally disconnected from how computers actually store it. So, for example, computers, right? If you're storing a piece of information in a computer, you're actually just storing it into an arbitrary spot, right? So if you take a memory, you try to store it in a computer, all of it is stored in one place in this arbitrary location. But in our brains, if you take one linear memory, what we actually do is we chop it up and we throw it in different areas of our brain. And the reason is because our brains actually work by association. So if you remember. The way that you and I remember things is we think about, what did I do before it? What did I do after it?
Who was I with? Where was I? What is the thing, right? Oh, is it this type of link, or was it sent to my email? Blah, 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 all of this stuff, right? And that's, that is, I think, one of the biggest unlocks, which is how do we actually build software that works the way that our brain works, so that we can actually, rather than fighting against the organization systems that we use every single day. And so a lot of times what we'll say, both internally and externally, is we're building a world without folders, right? That is, folders, it served us well, but for a while, and it was basically just this skeuomorphic representation of files, right? I can't remember the last time. I mean, probably when I went to the dentist or something, where you get those file cabinets with like these names, right, and all of that. And that's what we implemented when we first went into this. When computers were first invented. But that is just totally different from how our brain works, right? And I think that's fundamentally, one of the most important, unique perspectives that we have, which is all of the organization systems, whether it's note-taking apps, whether it's, Dropbox, like Notion, anything that you can actually, use today is all very focused on, hey, the first question you have to answer before you capture a piece of information is, where does this go, right? But that's not how our brains work. Our brains don't go, oh, I need to remember this thought, right? It's okay, cool. I remember this thought because it's related to this and this and this.
Yeah, it's usually triggered, even for me, like randomly, like if I'm doing multitasking and I was going to work on something, I'll usually look at what was the last page I looked at that sparked that idea if I forgot it. It's usually like a trigger or something.
Right. And I think where this becomes really powerful, right, is we're seeing this just based on how teams have been using Mem and all of that. There's a few biotech companies, for example, I think that are big users, and in biotech. So if you think of them as probably one of the best examples of knowledge work out there, right, where you're essentially just doing discovery, right, and making use of disparate information sources, where you have all this latent knowledge that's stored in random people's heads, right? Some people have very specific knowledge on a certain compound, and you have someone else who's running an experiment, and they have to decide between do I use this compound or that compound? And today, what happens is nothing, right? Today, you have two people in an organization that have perfect complementary knowledge bases, right? That just never know about each other, because there's no actual way to do that, right? So a lot of what we facilitate is, hey, if person A knows things, right, has captured things, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, right, that person B would really benefit from. How can we actually unlock that? Because that's where the magic moments really happen. So,
that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I feel like eventually all our ideas will be online, and then, but not only just online. That would be insane. We have to organize what we have right now currently. Like, a fraction of what we do and think about is online, even though there's a lot online, which demonstrates how much there is going on. But like with this small subset of data, we need to be able to organize that well, so that we can start adding more and more and more, and then connecting things. Because I mean, like, literally, like, the biggest inefficiencies in a company are when someone is working on the same issue or same question,
reinventing the wheel, right? Over and over again.
It's crazy. And that's within a team. Now think about, team to team within a company to company, et cetera. That's super cool. Yeah. I guess, like, how are you seeing, how is the evolution of Mem been? Obviously, products evolve, and what are some cool stories or case studies you guys have on how people are using it?
Yeah. So it's definitely been a fascinating journey. I think our overall mission has changed very little, if at all, right? So, I remember in our first pitch deck, one of the keywords that we called out is, basically, we're building towards collective intelligence, and that's that was kind of the defining characteristic. And if I look back, 2.5 years later, we're still working on the exact same overall mission. Of course, how that actually manifests itself in product is very different, right? So one of the unique challenges, I think, for us is the first thing that we actually have to do, right, is it's a very high barrier to entry to even just be, considered and competitive in what we're doing, because if, and fundamentally what we're building, part of what we're building is a tool that allows people to very easily capture information in the right ways, right? Or in ways that are very simple, that they don't have to, think about how to organize that much. But, in order to actually do that, right, there's all of these little things that we have to do. It has to be reliable, right? People have to, it has to be performant and fast. It has to, do all of those things. So we spent, I would say the first majority of the first, 18 to 24 months, really just building these foundations, right?
Yeah.
But knowing fully well, and of course, it's in the name, right? Mem.ai, knowing fully well the really magical thing we're going to unlock is when we actually start bringing in, the intelligence aspects of the product, right?
Interesting.
And that has been basically the last, I would say 6 months or so, right, where we've really started to do that. And over the next, few weeks, few months, a lot of these investments are going to become very visible in the product, right? So I think that's, so that's how a lot of our journey has been, and we're entering, I think one of the most exciting. It feels like kind of the perfect convergence of, right, like where the technology is first of all declining in cost rapidly. A lot of like Moore's law is no longer really a thing, but it is definitely a thing for certain fields, right? So for AI, right? Like if you look at, the costs of actually running models, training models, all of that, they've been going down at way faster than, 2x every 18 months. It's been like 10x every year, right? Or even more than that. So the convergence of, of a technological inflection point alongside, I think people just, really starting to realize that folders are not actually the best way of organizing information. And, we've seen a lot of things now in the collaboration space, come like things like Slack, which, has been very successful, but I don't think, you'll see anyone who will say that Slack is actually the end state, right? It's a temporary at best.
Yeah. I feel like Slack is good to a certain point. Then when you hit this, a lot of information channels, once they hit a certain point of saturation, they become useless or like less like Discord. At a certain point with so many users, it becomes insane.
So I think one of the issues with Slack, right? Well, it's interesting. Their name is actually an acronym for, I think it's like searchable log of something knowledge and like chat and knowledge, right? But the thing that, if you ask people, what are they worst at? It's search, right? But it's literally in the name. And I think the reality is the reason that happened is because in 2013, what was missing from the world was actually just a chat app, right? For Teams, right? So, I mean, there was HipChat. I don't know if you remember that, but that really, people hated HipChat, and Slack, I think, just came into this market and just dominated it. And they kind of became a victim of their own success in that way, right? Because they realized that they just had to scale that as fast as they could. And they kind of started to neglect everything else, which I think was probably in the original vision of, hey, how can we actually help people, make use of the information and search, right? So, but now that foundation has been built, right? The next, another company can't just come in and build a better UI on top of Slack, right? It actually, it actually allows people to build something, deeper and fundamentally innovative, right? So,
Yeah, no, and you had mentioned something, and it's funny because a couple friends in different spaces, kind of same. Or I've heard this trend before, that before you add it, you want the foundation for AI, and you want to be able to modularize things, but to begin, you have to build kind of a better workflow product to fit into the behavior of what you're trying to enhance, and then enhance it, right? So it sounds. I've heard this now, and I feel like it's maybe a rule. I mean, I don't know, but can you touch upon that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, AI is a tool. It's not the product, right? But it is, obviously it's an incredibly powerful tool. But the way that people engage, I think, the best sorts of intelligence experiences are those that you actually don't realize, that expose as little as possible about how it works in the background, right? And it's it's the, I think, we have these experiences every single day, right? With Spotify, like Spotify, just think about how incredible that experience is, how it always recommends the most, the most relevant music to you, how, if you can go to a song, you can start a radio, right? And you can immediately see, wow, these are all, songs that are actually very similar to this. And they always get that right. Right. So, but no one thinks of Spotify as an AI company. Right?
Yeah, no. And on the Spotify thing, it's like, just a side note. Yeah. I go through my like songs a lot. And I just shuffle between them. Yeah. And I could be wrong here, but I feel like they definitely show relevant songs based on what you're skipping. I mean,
they do. Oh, absolutely. They use all of those.
I've noticed this as a user. I'm like, okay, and I've noticed this long enough. I'm like, and I don't really think shuffle is just normal shuffle. It's
no, definitely not. No. So, if you go on basically shuffle, and if you heart a song, right, that's going to change the rest of your queue. If you skip a song, right, if you stop a song early, right, I mean, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm sure what happens is, if you skip it within the first 10 seconds or the first 30 seconds, there's a huge penalty on this, right? On what I'm going to show you.
And obviously another example is in consumer world is TikTok. That's all AI. That's all right. I mean,
right.
So,
but no one thinks of them as an AI company, right? Yeah. And I think that's super interesting because, first of all, they had to essentially build, like you said, whether it's workflow or it's, it's something else that actually creates the daily habit of using the product, right? And then I think in many ways you use the AI to actually augment the experience, right? Yeah,
that's cool. We're kind of nearing the end. I definitely want to end with a question for you, and you kind of mentioned this earlier about what are some cool technology trends that you where do you think we will be with technology in 10, 20 years? I know you alluded to Black Mirror and you think you're an optimist. What things from Black Mirror were true or I don't know, just just go into more detail on that of where you think technology will bring us and why it will be positive.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I at this point is probably contrarian belief is that I think in general, in general, there's a very pessimistic approach, I think that the world holds nowadays. And I think it's visible in a lot of just the rhetoric around, how people, politicians included, talk about, things. And quite frankly, I think there's a huge education problem, in terms of how people understand education, right? How people understand technology, right? If you just, I don't know if you've seen clips of any of the Congress hearings with big tech and all of that. And it's just, being an insider, those are so painful to watch because, on one hand, because, the things that a lot of people are saying just doesn't make any sense. Right. And then on the other hand, it's that there's millions of people who are watching this who are absorbing, essentially false information. Right. So I think, I have this view of the world where I think actually, most technology will be used for good rather than bad. And, technology, again, is a tool, right? Yeah. But I think, you take things in the media, things from Black Mirror, and people are just, looking at those things and they're all doom and gloom, right? When's the last time you've seen, something, I don't know. I think it probably Star Wars-esque or Star Trek-esque, right? Those are the last, positive things that I think we've seen.
Teleporters now it's all negative.
Right.
I feel like negative emotions are stronger than positive emotions.
Right. And I think people have figured that out. And, but I want the world to get back to a place where we're dreaming of going to the moon and becoming a spacefaring civilization. I mean, sure, that's one aspect, but also just having this view that we can solve any problem, climate change, all of that. And I think technology is such a core piece of that. And I think that's one thing that we need to embrace as a society. And, it's not all, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I think a huge part of it is just that there's such a big gap in understanding how the things work, right? So, people, for example, I think a lot of people probably believe that at Facebook there's a group of people who are just choosing what to put. It's literally a Black Mirror episode, right?
Yeah.
People are choosing what to put into your Facebook feed, right? The ads, and that obviously just isn't the case, right? So, I mean, in terms of the trends that I'm really excited about, I think the thing that we talked about, extensively here, I think AI, I think it's going to surprise a lot of people over the next, really, I think 2022, 2023, there's going to be such incredible applications that come out. And then, I mean, obviously, there's crypto. I'm still bullish on crypto. I think there's a lot of problems with it in terms of, I think, shill culture and all of that.
Yeah.
But the fundamental technology is really interesting, right? So, having this immutable public database that anyone can actually just plug into and use and build on top of really is like the promise of open source from the beginning, right? I think that's going to be that's going to be really interesting. So,
no, I definitely agree. Awesome, man. Well, Dennis, great having you on here. Really excited what you guys are building. Definitely will stay in touch more. Appreciate catching you up and hearing more about what you guys are doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Teddy. It was great to catch up as well, and hope it's not too cold in New York.